You know that weird, creeping pull you get when you look at a boarded-up house at the end of your street? That undeniable allure of just stepping right into the unknown. Well, in today's Explainer, we're tapping straight into that. It's a universal fascination, really. We've all had it since childhood. That irresistible urge to go poke around the empty, decaying, and forgotten spaces hiding right in our own hometowns.
But here's the question we really need to ask ourselves before we actually cross that threshold. What happens when the thrill of trespassing suddenly turns into a genuine fight for survival? Today, we're looking at 3 documented accounts of urban exploration that cross the line from a simple, maybe kind of reckless dare into something deeply, deeply unsettling. As we dive in, I want you to really question the psychological limits of exploring these places.
Okay, let's set the stage by looking at exactly what fuels this curiosity. We're talking about urban lore. You know the deal. These are the modern myths and legends deeply tied to local, usually abandoned geographic spots. I mean, literally every town has one, right? A mysterious, decaying space that just becomes the terrifying heart of local legend. It's the place where stories of top-secret experiments or, tragic histories end up echoing through the community for decades.
Part 1. The Military Village Shadows, a Cold War relic.
So to really understand the scale of what we're dealing with here, we got to look back a bit. During World War II and the Cold War, this place wasn't just some tiny, isolated bunker. It was a massive, vibrant community that housed over 200 military families. But then, in 1984, it was completely abandoned and closed off. It literally just sat there rotting until it was finally demolished in 2014. For an entire generation of local kids, it sat totally empty. And naturally, that fueled wild childhood rumors of secret underground experiments and hidden trapdoors in the base's old church. It was, without a doubt, the ultimate forbidden playground.
Well, a group of high school seniors finally decided to test that lore. And honestly, just picture the logistical tension of this break-in. They're driving down this overgrown dirt path with their headlights completely off, pitch black. They actually have to get out of their car in the dark to manually lift an unstaffed security gate. Once they're inside, they're navigating roads littered with discarded beds, dressers, tables, just junk everywhere. Finally, they lift a last checkpoint gate to enter the neighborhood itself. The way they described it, totally surreal, like stepping right into the upside down from Stranger Things. Perfectly intact military housing units just sitting there, completely dead and decaying.
So they explore the church, they explore a few of the homes, but they notice the atmosphere is just remarkably heavy. And then, inside one of these intact houses, the silence suddenly breaks. They hear this unnatural wood creaking. It sounds exactly like heavy footsteps right above them on the second floor. They totally freeze, and then one of the explorers points straight at a window. He says, 3 shadows can be seen moving on the outside of the house that was next door. Yeah, sudden, silent movement of heads shifting just out of sight into the backyard. Panic instantly sets in.
They bolt. They sprint out the door, making a frantic dash straight for their getaway car. But as they get close to the vehicle, they freeze again. Standing right at their car is a tall figure in a disgusting, old black dress. And she already has the back door open with one leg halfway into the back seat of their vehicle. When one of the boys screams, she drops the handle and takes off running toward the abandoned church. They peel out of there, literally nearly crashing on the dirt roads as they escape.
Which really forces us to ask, was the woman at the car just a territorial squatter protecting her shelter, or was she something else entirely? Look, logically speaking, a homeless individual seeking shelter in an abandoned military base makes total sense, right? But why try to climb into a running getaway car occupied by a bunch of terrified teenagers? That part doesn't track. The rational theory really struggles to hold up against the terrifying reality of that encounter.
Part 2. The Rocking Chair Phenomenon. Rotting Floors and Unseen Residents.
So, in our next case, a couple exploring a severely decayed rural house finds themselves dealing with some seriously perilous environmental dangers. We're talking massive fall-through-the-floor type holes in the living room. But upstairs, the findings are heartbreakingly frozen in time. There's a depressing, still-made bed with a folded bathrobe resting at the foot of it, a dark crawl space stuffed with cobweb-covered vintage baby food. But then, there's a sound, a rhythmic creaking echoing from down a narrow path that connects the crawl spaces.
Walking toward the sound, the explorer is fully expecting logic to kick in. He assumes he's about to be jumped by, like, a territorial raccoon that's had way too much vintage baby food. But the reality? Sitting in the room is an old, wrinkled woman in a long skirt, just rocking slowly in a chair. He actually speaks to her. She stops, she stands up, And then she begins to emit this low, guttural hum before whipping around to face him. Nope, absolutely no way. He flees downstairs in absolute terror.
Now, his girlfriend is completely skeptical and actually laughs at him. She marches right upstairs to prove him wrong. And guess what? She finds an empty room with an empty rocking chair. But as they turn to leave, it starts up again, that undeniable sound of creaking wood. They look at each other and she mouths the whispered words, "What is that?" She takes a few cautious steps back toward the door and hears it for herself, the humming melody. She peeks in, sees the apparition with her own eyes, and her skepticism evaporates into absolute panic as they both run for their lives.
Part 3. The Deceased Neighbor's Ghost. The Horror Next Door.
Now let's move from rural decay to the house right next door. The explorers in this case study lived next to an intensely angry, super territorial old man. And then one day, the yelling just stopped. Months went by. Until one early morning, the neighborhood was bathed in a sudden flash of siren lights in the dark. 2 paramedics were seen carrying out a zipped-up body bag. It turned out the angry neighbor had suffered a really lonely, undiscovered death. And with his only son living way out of state, the house just sat there, completely untouched for years. It was basically a literal tomb sitting right next door.
Eventually, as you might guess, a teenage dare pushes our narrator to finally break in. And here are the steps of breaking into the unknown. Step 1, he unsuccessfully tries to kick in the heavy, unbudging front door. Step 2, he manages to pry open an unlocked side window and slides inside. And Step 3, he is instantly hit by an overwhelming, gag-inducing smell of death. I mean, let me ask you directly, would you have kept going once that horrific smell hit your senses? Because crazy enough, he did.
Inside, he finds a life that was just tragically interrupted. There's a book resting by a recliner with a bookmark still tucked right inside. A sweater draped casually over the back of a kitchen chair sitting next to an old, untouched coffee mug. Dusty pots left sitting dead on the stove burners. These eerie, perfectly preserved details really build up this incredible tension right up until the exact moment he hears a massive, inexplicable bang against the wall coming from the other side of the empty house. Yeah, he immediately bailed out the front door.
But the story doesn't actually end when he leaves. Later that night, looking out his bedroom window at the abandoned house next door, his friend notices something. A silhouette. Literally the dark shape and outline of someone visible in the darkness. They watch in just absolute horror as a distinct, moving outline shifts from the deceased old man's bedroom doorway, moves right up to the window, and then slowly fades back into the pitch blackness of the house.
Part 4. Rationalizing the unexplainable. Evaluating the evidence.
So the crucial takeaway here is balancing the evidence by impartially laying out our theories. At the military base, sure, maybe they were just squatters seeking shelter. But trying to enter a running getaway car full of people, that totally defies logic. At the ruined house, okay, it could be a drifter living in the decay. But a humming apparition that completely vanished from a room within seconds? Highly unlikely. And at the neighbor's house? Maybe. Just maybe. It was the estranged son returning to check the property. But why on earth would he be standing in the dark without a flashlight, slowly fading into nothingness? The rational explanations constantly bump right up against chilling facts that simply defy easy answers. And I think that brings us to the real core of urban exploration. These spaces command our respect, not just because they're physically and structurally dangerous, but because they hold on to the echoes of the people who left them behind. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you pass an abandoned house in your neighborhood, are you just going to see a simple decaying structure? Or will you see a door left wide open to the unknown? Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me today, and keep your